The Secrets Behind the Badge, a tale of betrayal and tragedy. On a frosty February morning in 2008, the quiet town of Hanover, New Hampshire, awoke to a chilling discovery. The lifeless body of 38-year-old trooper Lila Porter, a respected figure in her community, was found sprawled in her kitchen, a single gunshot wound to her chest. The discovery sent shockwaves through the town, but it was just the beginning of a dark and twisted tale that would uncover betrayal, forbidden passion, and the deadly consequences of secrets hidden in plain sight. At 6:45 a.m., it was Emily Porter, Lila's teenage daughter, who stumbled upon the horrific scene. Her mother lay in a pool of crimson, her service-issued weapon strategically placed near her hand, as if someone had staged the scene to tell a false story of despair. Emily's trembling voice pierced through the early morning silence as she dialed 911, her sobs clashing with the dispatcher's calm instructions. Within minutes, the Hanover police and state investigators swarmed the modest home, led by seasoned detective Garrett Lynch, a man known for his relentless pursuit of the truth and an uncanny ability to see beyond the obvious. From the moment Lynch stepped into the crime scene, something felt off. Lila's gun was pristine, too pristine for a weapon fired in such close quarters. The blood spatter told one story, but the weapon told another. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered glass or broken locks to suggest an intruder. This wasn't a random act of violence, this was personal. For Detective Lynch, a veteran of 25 years with countless solved cases under his belt, this one was different. It wasn't just the gruesome nature of the crime, it was the unraveling facade of Lila Porter's seemingly perfect life. Lila Porter had built a reputation as one of the most diligent and principled troopers in the New Hampshire State Police. Joining the force in her late 20s, she had shattered glass ceilings in a male-dominated field, all while balancing the demanding responsibilities of single motherhood. To her colleagues, she was a hero, a kind-hearted but driven officer who could handle the grueling demands of the job without losing her compassion. But Lila's world revolved around her daughter, Emily. A dedicated mother, she made sure her long shifts and late-night casework never overshadowed their special moments. From attending school events to never missing their cherished Friday night movie marathons, Lila was the epitome of strength and sacrifice. Yet, beneath the surface of her carefully constructed life, she carried a loneliness she didn't dare to admit. Enjoying the story? Don't miss out on more thrilling and engaging content. Subscribe now and hit the like button to stay updated on every twist and turn. Your support encourages us to bring great contents. After her divorce, Lila found herself yearning for connection. It was during this vulnerable time that Alan Hayes entered her life. A senior trooper in his early 40s, Hayes was charismatic, confident, and seemingly a kindred spirit. At first, their connection was innocent, shared stories over coffee at the barracks, camaraderie forged in the trenches of their demanding jobs. But as December 2007 unfolded, their bond deepened into something far more dangerous. What began as fleeting moments of solace soon spiraled into a secret affair, one that would eventually shatter the lives of everyone involved. Hayes, married with children, was a man with secrets of his own, and their entanglement became a ticking time bomb. As Lynch delved deeper into the layers of Lila's life, the picture-perfect image began to crumble. What truly happened in the months leading to her death? Who stood to gain from her silence, and what secrets did Lila take to the grave? This wasn't just a murder. It was a puzzle, with pieces scattered across lives riddled with lies, betrayal, and choices that could never be undone. For Detective Lynch, solving this case wasn't just about justice, it was about unearthing the truth from the shadows of a seemingly idyllic life turned tragic. The investigation into Trooper Lila Porter's death would reveal more than anyone could have imagined, an intricate web of love, deception, and the deadly cost of secrets too dangerous to keep. The tension in Trooper Lila Porter's life was reaching a breaking point by the time Alan Hayes entered her world with his polished charm and easy confidence. Alan was more than just a colleague, he was a symbol of everything Lila thought she lacked. Respected, steady, and charismatic, Alan had carved out a reputation as a natural leader, someone who could diffuse crises with a calm authority that earned admiration from both peers and subordinates. But beneath the accolades and his picture-perfect public image, Alan Hayes carried secrets of his own. His marriage to Deborah, a beloved schoolteacher known for her tireless charitable efforts, seemed unshakable to outsiders. Together, they had 2 young sons and a life that was the epitome of suburban stability. Their family photos were staples in local newsletters, often accompanied by glowing tributes to Deborah's contributions to the community. Behind closed doors, however, Alan's world was far less idyllic. During stolen moments with Lila, he confided his dissatisfaction with his marriage, painting Deborah as distant and their relationship as one of convenience rather than love. Alan felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of expectations that came with being the perfect husband, father, and trooper. Lila, in turn, opened up about her insecurities, her fear that she was unworthy of love and destined to remain alone, overshadowed by her role as a single mother and a woman in a male-dominated profession. Their connection deepened quickly, transitioning from professional camaraderie to passionate, clandestine encounters. But as the affair intensified, so did the tension between them. Lila yearned for more than fleeting moments and hollow promises. She wanted a life with Alan, free from secrecy. Her patience waned as Alan hesitated, torn between the life he had built and the life Lila offered. By February 2008, the cracks in their forbidden relationship were beginning to show. Lila's frustration had boiled over, leading to heated arguments. Emily Porter, Lila's perceptive teenage daughter, later told investigators about overhearing intense disputes between her mother and a man she worked with. Though she hadn't known his identity at the time, her account gave Detective Garrett Lynch and his team their first real lead. The search through Lila's digital life confirmed Emily's suspicions. Emails and text messages painted a vivid picture of a relationship spiraling out of control. In one email, Lila pressed Alan to leave his wife, accusing him of making excuses. In another, Alan pleaded for more time, his words dripping with guilt and desperation. Their relationship had become a minefield, with every step threatening to ignite an explosion. Detective Lynch, a seasoned investigator known for his meticulous attention to detail, called Alan in for questioning on Valentine's Day, a bitterly ironic twist given the circumstances. Alan arrived in uniform, his composed facade betraying subtle cracks as Lynch began to probe. At first, Alan denied anything beyond professional interactions with Lila. But when faced with the damning emails, his resolve faltered. He admitted to the affair but minimized its significance, describing it as a mistake he had been trying to end. The deeper the investigators dug into Alan's life, the more his carefully constructed image unraveled. Colleagues recalled subtle changes in his demeanor leading up to Lila's death. Once calm and collected, Alan had grown short-tempered, snapping at subordinates and isolating himself during breaks. His erratic behavior, previously dismissed as job stress, now appeared to be the signs of a man buckling under the weight of his duplicity. Meanwhile, the autopsy results shattered any lingering doubts about the nature of Lila's death. The trajectory of the bullet and the angle of entry made it clear she could not have pulled the trigger herself. This was no suicide, it was a calculated homicide, carefully staged to mislead investigators. The breakthrough came on February 20th, when a routine search of Alan's vehicle uncovered a damning piece of evidence, a jacket bearing traces of gunpowder residue. Coupled with CCTV footage placing Alan's car near Lila's house on the night of her murder, the evidence was mounting. Alan claimed he had been on a routine patrol, but his alibi crumbled under scrutiny. His shift had ended hours earlier. Emily Porter's second interview provided another pivotal clue. She tearfully recounted a recent argument between her mother and Alan, overheard from her room. While she couldn't make out every word, the tone was unmistakable. Lila's voice was sharp, insistent, demanding answers. Alan's was low, defensive, and tense. The argument ended with Lila storming upstairs, slamming her bedroom door, while Alan left without a word. The pieces were falling into place. Lila, emboldened by her frustration, had threatened to expose their affair to Deborah. For Alan, the stakes couldn't have been higher. His career, his family, and his carefully curated reputation were all on the line. The investigators believed that in his desperation, Alan had decided that silencing Lila was his only option. As Detective Lynch pieced together the final elements of the case, one thing became clear: this wasn't just a story of love gone wrong. It was a cautionary tale of ambition, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of secrets too dangerous to keep. The truth behind Trooper Lila Porter's death would shake the foundations of their tight-knit community, leaving behind a legacy of shattered lives and unanswered questions. And for Alan Hayes, the man who had once embodied respect and authority, there would be no escaping the shadows of his choices. The badge he wore, once a symbol of integrity, now stood as a grim reminder of the lies that had consumed him. The arrest of Alan Hayes was executed with precision on the crisp morning of March 8, 2008. Detective Garrett Lynch, a man seasoned by decades of investigations, stood silently as officers entered Alan's home. Alan, once the embodiment of authority and composure, was now a shadow of his former self, his face pale, his shoulders hunched, and his confidence shattered. The team moved swiftly, their voices low but firm, as they placed Alan in handcuffs. Deborah Hayes, startled from her sleep, watched the scene unfold with a mixture of shock and silent resignation. Their two young sons clung to her, confused and frightened by the sight of their father being led away. Lynch had hoped to spare the boys from such trauma, but there was no escaping the consequences of Alan's choices. Alan Hayes was officially charged with the murder of Trooper Lila Porter. The evidence against him was overwhelming: the gunpowder residue on his jacket, the surveillance footage, the emails, and the forensic confirmation that his service weapon had fired the fatal shot. For Lynch and his team, it was the culmination of weeks of painstaking work, a case meticulously built to withstand the scrutiny of the courtroom. But even as the case against Alan solidified, questions about Deborah Hayes lingered in the background. The witness who claimed to have seen her car near Lila's house on the night of the murder added a layer of intrigue that couldn't be ignored. Lynch, ever the methodical investigator, kept her under close watch. Could Deborah have been involved in some way? If not as the perpetrator, then as an accomplice, or even as the one who pushed Alan over the edge. The trial of Alan Hayes began in the summer of 2008, drawing national attention. The courtroom was packed with reporters, colleagues, and members of the community who had once admired Alan and Lila. The prosecution presented a damning case, detailing Alan's affair, his financial struggles, and the mounting pressure that led him to murder. They painted a vivid picture of a man unraveling under the weight of his secrets. Lila Porter had threatened to expose their relationship, and Alan, desperate to protect his career, his marriage, and the $500,000 inheritance that would vanish in a divorce, had seen no other way out. The defense, however, took a different approach. They didn't deny the affair but argued that Alan had been framed. Deborah Hayes became the centerpiece of their strategy. The defense claimed that Deborah, driven by jealousy and rage, had discovered the affair and killed Lila in a fit of passion. They pointed to the witness testimony about her car, her shaky alibi, and her potential motive as reasons to doubt Alan's guilt. The courtroom drama intensified as Deborah was called to the stand. Calm and composed, she denied any involvement in Lila's death. Her testimony painted Alan as a man who had betrayed her trust and shattered their family. But under cross-examination, cracks in her story began to appear. The defense grilled her about her whereabouts on the night of the murder, her knowledge of the affair, and her reaction when she found out. Just as the trial seemed to be heading toward a conclusion, a shocking twist emerged. A forensic re-examination of the evidence revealed an overlooked detail, a partial fingerprint on the inside of Lila's front door. The print didn't belong to Alan, it belonged to Deborah. The discovery reignited speculation about Deborah's involvement. Lynch, though focused on ensuring Alan was held accountable, couldn't ignore the possibility that Deborah had played a role. Was she a co-conspirator, or had she acted independently? The prosecution, wary of derailing their case against Allen, downplayed the significance of the fingerprint. But for the defense, it was a lifeline. They argued that the print placed Deborah at the scene of the crime and raised reasonable doubt about Allen's guilt. On September 15, 2008, after weeks of testimony and days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Allen Hayes was found guilty of first-degree murder. The evidence against him was simply too strong to ignore. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, his fall from grace complete. But the questions surrounding Deborah Hayes persisted. While she was never formally charged, her involvement, or lack thereof, remained a topic of speculation. Some believed she had acted out of jealousy, others thought she had pushed Allen to the brink, and a few even suspected she had orchestrated the entire crime. For Detective Lynch, the case was a bitter victory. Justice had been served, but the full truth of what happened on that cold February night might never be known. The lives of everyone involved, Lila, Allen, Deborah, and their children, were irrevocably shattered, leaving a haunting legacy of betrayal and tragedy. In the years following the trial, Lila Porter's name became a symbol of strength and sacrifice. Her colleagues honored her memory with an annual scholarship for aspiring female officers, a tribute to her dedication to breaking barriers in law enforcement. Emily Porter, though scarred by the loss of her mother, went on to advocate for victims of domestic violence, ensuring that her mother's story was never forgotten. As for Allen and Deborah Hayes, their once perfect lives became cautionary tales. Allen remained behind bars, a reminder of the devastating cost of secrets and lies. Deborah, though free, lived under the shadow of suspicion, her polished image forever tarnished. Detective Garrett Lynch retired a year after the case, the weight of it still lingering in his mind. He often thought about Lila and the life she had fought so hard to build. In the end, her story wasn't just about betrayal and murder, it was about the fragility of trust, the corrosive power of secrets, and the unrelenting pursuit of justice. Emily Porter's testimony was the emotional linchpin of the trial. As she described her mother's descent into anxiety and fear, the courtroom fell silent, hanging on her every word. Her voice, though steady, was tinged with a sorrow that cut through the sterile formality of the proceedings. She was scared, Emily said, her eyes glistening. I don't know everything that was happening, but she kept saying she couldn't live like this anymore. She told me once that someone would rather see her dead than let the truth come out. The weight of her words lingered, pulling the jury deeper into the reality of Lila's final days. Emily recalled the night she discovered her mother's lifeless body. Her trembling voice painted a haunting picture of the blood-soaked kitchen and the staged suicide that shattered her world. I thought I'd never be okay again, Emily said, her gaze fixed on Allen Hayes, who refused to meet her eyes. Her testimony not only underscored Allen's betrayal but also reminded everyone of the human cost of his actions. For the jury, it was a stark reminder that Lila Porter was more than a victim, she was a mother, a role model, and the anchor of Emily's life. The defense, led by seasoned attorney Jonathan Mallory, faced an uphill battle. Knowing they couldn't deny the affair or the forensic evidence outright, they aimed to sow doubt about Allen's intent and shift the focus toward Deborah Hayes. Mallory argued that while Allen had made poor choices, there was no concrete proof he had pulled the trigger. He pointed to Deborah's shaky alibi, the witness who placed her car near Lila's home, and the partial fingerprint found on Lila's door as reasons to question her potential involvement. Allen Hayes was a man trapped in a failing marriage and a scandalous affair, Mallory said during his opening statement. But desperation does not equal murder. What if someone else, someone closer to this situation, acted out of anger and jealousy? The defense called Deborah to the stand, a move that electrified the courtroom. Deborah, dressed in muted tones, maintained a calm exterior as Mallory questioned her about her marriage and the night of the murder. Mrs. Hayes, Mallory began, were you aware of your husband's affair with Trooper Porter? Deborah hesitated for the first time, her composed demeanor cracking slightly. I suspected, she admitted. But I didn't know for sure until after her death. Mallory pressed further, questioning her whereabouts on the night of February 11, 2008, and challenging the timeline she had provided during earlier interviews. While her answers remained consistent, her body language betrayed a simmering unease, which Mallory exploited to cast further doubt. As the trial stretched into its fourth week, the prosecution delivered a bombshell. They introduced a previously undiscovered piece of evidence, a voicemail Lila had left for a close friend just hours before her death. In the recording, Lila's voice trembled with fear. "I don't know what to do," she said. "He said he'd destroy me if I didn't stop. He said my daughter wouldn't have a mother if I didn't keep quiet." The message was a devastating blow to the defense. While Lila hadn't named Alan outright, the context was clear. She was afraid for her life, and the source of her fear was someone intimately connected to her. After 6 grueling weeks of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. The evidence against Alan Hayes was overwhelming, but the defense had succeeded in introducing enough ambiguity about Deborah's potential involvement to complicate the case. The deliberations stretched over 4 days, the jurors grappling with the tangled web of lies, betrayals, and half-truths. Finally, on September 20, 2009, the verdict was delivered. Alan Hayes was found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, the tension finally breaking. Alan remained stoic, his expression unreadable as the judge delivered the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Deborah Hayes, though never formally charged, left the courtroom under the weight of public suspicion. Her role in the tragedy, while unproven, remained a shadow that would follow her for the rest of her life. For Detective Garrett Lynch, the conclusion of the trial brought little solace. The truth, while compelling enough for a conviction, felt incomplete. He retired shortly after the trial, haunted by the unanswered questions and the lives destroyed by the case. Emily Porter, now an orphan, struggled to rebuild her life. She channeled her grief into advocacy work, speaking out about the dangers of workplace relationships and the emotional toll of domestic violence. Her resilience became a testament to her mother's strength and love. As for the small town of Hanover, the scandal left an indelible mark. The story of Trooper Lila Porter and Alan Hayes became a cautionary tale about the consequences of betrayal and the fragility of trust. Though justice was served, the tragedy of Lila Porter's death served as a chilling reminder, even those who seem untouchable can be brought low by the weight of their secrets. The prosecution's case against Alan Hayes was as meticulously constructed as the life he had once portrayed to the world. By the time Assistant District Attorney Marlene Carson rested her case, the jury was left with a chilling portrait of a man whose desperation had driven him to murder. The financial motive loomed large, $500,000 in inheritance money that he stood to lose if his wife Deborah discovered the affair and filed for divorce. Combined with the overwhelming forensic evidence and Emily Porter's emotional testimony, the case against Alan felt insurmountable. Yet, the defense refused to concede. Attorney Paul Grayson, determined to sow doubt, made his final push, focusing on the idea that the prosecution's narrative left too many unanswered questions. Grayson's strategy relied heavily on painting Deborah Hayes as a possible suspect. Her testimony, though consistent, was scrutinized relentlessly. Grayson highlighted her knowledge of the affair, suggesting that the betrayal could have driven her to confront Lila in a fit of jealousy and rage. Mrs. Hayes, Grayson said during cross-examination, his tone sharp but controlled, "You admit that you knew about the affair before Lila Porter's death. Isn't it true that you felt humiliated and betrayed? Enjoying the story? Don't miss out on more thrilling and engaging content. Subscribe now and hit the like button to stay updated on every twist and turn. Your support encourages us to bring great contents." Deborah, maintaining her composure, responded firmly. "Yes, I felt betrayed. But I would never harm another person because of my husband's mistakes." Grayson pressed on, bringing up the witness who claimed to have seen a car matching Deborah's near Lila's home on the night of the murder. "I was at home with my children," Deborah said, her voice steady. "I have nothing to hide. While Deborah's calm demeanor helped her credibility, the defense's line of questioning left a seed of doubt in the minds of the jurors. Could her poised exterior mask a darker truth? In a bold and risky move, Paul Grayson called Alan Hayes to testify in his own defense. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Alan took the stand, his expression stoic but his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the microphone. "Mr. Hayes," Grayson began, "you've been portrayed as a man who would do anything to protect his reputation, his finances, and his career. Is that who you are?" Alan took a deep breath before responding. "No. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I would never harm Lila. I cared about her. What happened to her was a tragedy, but I didn't kill her." For hours, Alan answered Grayson's questions, painting himself as a flawed but innocent man. He admitted to the affair, expressing regret for his betrayal of Deborah and his children. He claimed he had tried to end the relationship with Lila but that she had grown increasingly insistent, threatening to reveal their secret. "She was angry," Alan said, his voice faltering. "She felt abandoned, and I don't blame her. But I didn't kill her. I was at home that night." When cross-examined by ADA Carson, however, Alan's composed facade began to crack. Carson dissected his timeline, pointing out inconsistencies in his alibi and confronting him with the forensic evidence. "Mr. Hayes," Carson said, her voice sharp, "how do you explain the gunpowder residue on your jacket? Or the surveillance footage placing you near Lila Porter's home on the night of her murder?" Alan hesitated, his gaze darting toward the jury. I can't explain that," he admitted. It was the moment the prosecution had been waiting for. Alan's inability to account for the damning evidence further eroded his credibility, solidifying the case against him. After closing arguments, the jury retired to deliberate. The weight of the evidence against Alan was overwhelming, but the defense's efforts to implicate Deborah had introduced an element of uncertainty. For 2 days, the jurors debated the case, grappling with the tangled web of motives and evidence. On the morning of the third day, the jury announced they had reached a verdict. The courtroom was silent as the foreperson stood to deliver the jury's decision. "We find the defendant, Alan Hayes, guilty of first-degree murder." The words hung in the air, followed by an audible gasp from the gallery. Alan slumped in his chair, his expression one of resignation. Deborah, seated in the back of the courtroom, closed her eyes and exhaled deeply, her face a mix of relief and sorrow. As the judge sentenced Alan to life in prison without parole, the weight of the case seemed to settle over everyone in the room. The trial had revealed not just a single act of violence but a cascade of betrayals, lies, and broken lives. In the months following the trial, the community of Hanover struggled to heal. The scandal had left a permanent mark, tarnishing the reputation of the state police and shattering the lives of everyone involved. Detective Garrett Lynch retired shortly after the trial, haunted by the case. Emily Porter, now living with her aunt and uncle, found solace in advocating for victims of domestic violence, determined to honor her mother's memory by helping others. As for Deborah Hayes, she moved away from Hanover, seeking a fresh start for herself and her children. Though she was never formally implicated, whispers of her potential involvement followed her wherever she went, a shadow she would carry for the rest of her life. And Alan Hayes, once a respected state trooper, now sat in a prison cell, left to contemplate the choices that had led him to ruin. His story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the destructive power of lies, betrayal, and desperation. For Lila Porter, justice had been served, but the tragedy of her death lingered, a stark reminder that even the strongest among us can fall victim to the darkness within those we trust. For Emily Porter, the verdict brought a complex wave of emotions. It was justice for her mother, Lila, but it did little to fill the void left by her absence. As the gavel fell and the court recessed, Emily sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had testified to the pain, the fear, and the heartbreak her family endured in the months leading up to her mother's murder. The guilty verdict confirmed what she already knew: Alan Hayes had taken everything from her. But justice, while satisfying, did not erase the nightmares, the whispers in her small town, or the knowledge that her mother's life had been cut short by someone she once trusted. Emily's guardians, her aunt and uncle, supported her through the trial and beyond, but she often retreated to her room, staring at photos of her mother and imagining what life could have been like if things had gone differently. Hanover, once a quiet, tight-knit town, was shaken to its core. The trial had exposed not just Alan Hayes but also the vulnerabilities of the community itself. People whispered in hushed tones at grocery stores and coffee shops, their conversations laced with shock and disbelief. The state police department, in particular, bore the brunt of the scandal. Alan's betrayal was seen as a stain on their reputation, a reminder that even those sworn to uphold the law could fall from grace. New protocols were implemented to ensure tighter oversight of officers, and mandatory psychological evaluations became routine to catch signs of stress or misconduct before they escalated. For those who had worked closely with Alan, the betrayal was personal. His partner of 8 years, Detective Marcus Reed, admitted feeling blindsided. "We trusted him," Reed said in an interview. "He was one of the best. Or so we thought." Deborah Hayes became a subject of both sympathy and scrutiny. Many saw her as a victim, blindsided by her husband's actions, but others speculated that she might have known more than she let on. In the months after the trial, Deborah sold the family home and moved with her children to a neighboring state. She sought a fresh start, enrolling her boys in new schools and finding a job as a school counselor, a role that allowed her to focus on helping others rebuild their lives, just as she was attempting to rebuild her own. In interviews, Deborah spoke sparingly about Alan. "He was a good father at one time," she said in one rare statement. "But somewhere along the way, he lost himself. I can't forgive what he did, but I have to focus on my children now. They're my priority." Despite her efforts to move forward, Deborah remained a polarizing figure in Hanover's lingering gossip. Some defended her, while others speculated about her possible involvement, even in the absence of evidence. For Alan, life behind bars was a stark contrast to the respect and authority he once commanded. Stripped of his badge, his uniform, and his freedom, he became another inmate in a system he had once upheld. Prison life was harsh for Alan. Former law enforcement officers were rarely welcomed among the general population, and he found himself in solitary confinement more often than not, a safety precaution that doubled as a form of psychological punishment. Alan spent his days replaying the choices that led him there. He wrote letters to Deborah and his children, though they rarely responded. His appeals for leniency or retrials were consistently denied. In his isolation, Alan began keeping a journal, detailing his life before the affair, during the trial, and after his conviction. For Emily Porter, her mother's murder became a catalyst for change. By the time she graduated high school, she had already begun volunteering with organizations that supported victims of domestic violence and families affected by violent crime. Her speeches at events often started with, "I was 13 when my life was shattered." She recounted the signs her mother had ignored, the possessiveness, the arguments, the threats disguised as love. Emily became a voice for others like her, urging women to recognize red flags and advocating for stronger protections for victims of workplace harassment and domestic violence. By the time she graduated college, Emily was well on her way to becoming a criminal psychologist, determined to understand what drove people like Alan Hayes to commit unthinkable acts. Hanover slowly began to heal, but the scars remained. The annual memorial held for Lila Porter at the local park became a poignant reminder of the lives affected by the tragedy. At the center of the memorial stood a bench with a plaque that read, "In memory of Lila Porter, a life taken too soon. May her story remind us to cherish love and seek justice." Detective Garrett Lynch, now retired, attended every year. The case had taken a toll on him, but he found solace in knowing justice had been served. "It's never just about solving a case," he said at one memorial. "It's about the lives left behind." The story of Alan Hayes and Lila Porter became a cautionary tale, one of love, betrayal, and the dark consequences of desperation. For those who lived through it, the trial and its aftermath were a reminder that even the most polished lives can hide the deepest secrets. And while the town of Hanover moved forward, it never forgot. The lessons of Lila's life and death became part of its fabric, a quiet reminder that justice, though powerful, can never truly heal the wounds left by tragedy. Don't miss out on more thrilling and engaging content. Subscribe now and hit the like button to stay updated on every twist and turn. Your support encourages us to bring great contents.